All right, bonjour et bienvenue tout le monde. On behalf of Fourth Space and the In.Site Residency Planning Committee, welcome everyone in person or via Zoom to Culture of Color and Ecoliteracy of Textile Design with Vanessa Mardirossian. We are streaming live from Concordia University's Fourth Space, which is located on unceded indigenous lands in Jojage. And those of you who are unfamiliar with Fourth Space, we collaborate with our university community here to connect folks to the diverse initiatives, research projects, and dialogues that are in development across the university. So we're delighted to have the opportunity to work with In.Site to explore sustainable practices and pedagogies in fine arts all week this week. We are running this event as a live stream meeting, so those of you on Zoom, if you want to jump in with questions or comments for Vanessa here today, feel free to do so by turning on the camera, raising a hand, or popping something into the chat. And those of you in the space, if you'd like to participate, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you so that we can hear you on the live stream and recording. All right, without further ado, over to you, Vanessa. Welcome.
Thank you. So thank you for having me today. I don't know if you can see, I'm sharing my screen. I don't know if the one
you'll have just restart your screen share.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let me do a lecture presentation. Okay. So, yeah, thank you for having me today. I'm really happy to be here to present the story behind my research. My name is Vanessa Mardirossian. I'm a PhD student at the IND program here at Concordia. I'm also teaching textile design at the École Supérieure de Mode de l'UQAM, and I'm a textile designer who worked in the fashion industry for over 20 years. So today I'm going to present you culture of color and ecoliteracy of textile design. So as I was explaining, this research started from my vision within the industry, where I've been working for haute couture, prêt-à-porter, fast fashion for over 20 years. In this industry, everything is going so fast, we never have time to question colors, we question materialities, and colors especially is my way of expressing myself. So I have had a lot of fun for so many years playing with prints, playing with graphics, playing with colors, but we never really questions the sourcing of the color. What is it made of? What is the interaction with the living organisms and the environments? So today we see more and more reports, scientific reports about this toxicity in textiles and the fact that there are some interactions going on between the living world and the material world. So here on these pictures extracted from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we can visualize this invisible toxicity. We can observe that at each step of the textile process, there are some leaching of toxic molecules and compounds, from the sourcing of the materials to the production to even the used materials when we wash the clothes, until to when we wear the clothes too, you know, the connection between the textile and our skin as a porous membrane, there is some interaction between the body and the toxic molecules. As a matter of fact, at the end, you know, this enters the food chain by the air we breathe, by the water we drink, and by the food we eat. So the first one we started to be interested in this problematic was the designer Victor Papanecht in the late 60s, beginning 70s. And here on this map he built in 1969, we can see how ecology is closely related to design and medicine and different other disciplines. He was the first one to really highlight this multidisciplinary way of approaching problematics. Then a good example is from the duo of the designer and the chemist McDonough and Michael Braungart. In the 90s, a good example I like to mention is that they had to do an ecological fabric. So what the chemists did, Braungart started to analyze the 8,000 more toxic molecules, the 8,000 most used molecules in the textile industry, to keep only the 38 considered the safest to develop the most ecological textiles. So from this idea, I decided to do my research really at the interaction of chemistry, environmental health, and textile design. I really wanted to do a research through design, which is material-based research, a practice-based research, where I could intersect these three disciplines. At the bottom of the image, you can see that there are many, many steps, and we saw different treatment of textile where toxicity can happen. Because the subject is so wide, I decided to really concentrate on dyes, because this is my main tool. So here I give you an overview of my methodology happening in 4 different phases. First, I start by doing an exploratory research, going in an unknown territory for me, which is the scientific territory. Entering in conversation with scientists, like especially chemists and environmental health searchers, then building a literature review, not only scientific but also artistic, which kind of designers, which kind of practice are addressing this issue. Then entering the laboratory, I start my material-based exploration in the lab, where I prototyped different dyes or way of coloring fabrics and fibers. And this leads me to the third phase, which is the exhibitions, where is the moment where we can share, disseminate, connect with the public and exchange to get a feedback loop, and then going back to the lab to carry on the reflection. Then in the phase 4, I have this mapping where I try to build this ecosystem, the local fashion ecosystem around the way I live, the place I live in Montreal. And in parallel, I hold some key informant interview with specialists around the world in sustainable dyes, natural dyes, bio dyes, and then through workshops, colloques, and exhibition, again, I go back to interact with the public and get some feedback to pursue the reflection. So here in my exploratory research, at the beginning of the exploration, I worked with the Professor Yves Gelidnas, one of my supervisors. He's a chemist here at Concordia, and we analyzed the different dyes, synthetic dyes. So synthetic dyes, as you might know, are made of petroleum compounds. They started to be popular, to be created in the middle 19th century, in 1856, by the Professor Perkins. And since then, they became the norm. But there is a problematic with these dyes, because they have these carcinogenic, mutagenic, reprotoxic compounds at the end. So I wanted to understand, this invisible, I call it the molecular aspect of color. So by analyzing these dyes in a chromatograph, we could see that, at the high level you could see here was indicating a special compound. And when we checked what was this compound, is called the anthracenidium, which is a carcinogenic. So understanding that, checking with the CNESST, we see that this carcinogenic can, enter in connection with the body and create problems. So then I wanted to understand which kind of problems, when the toxics enter in connection with living organisms, lifestyle, animals, or human. So I did a directed study with the Professor Larissa Taxer from Sherbrooke University, and I was trying to visualize in a designer way if I could say, a designerly way of understanding the process of the formation of tumor and cancer. So what you see here at the top is healthy cells. So our body is made of trillions of cells, and they several times a day, you know, they regenerate. But when toxic compounds enter in connection with the body, these interactions start to create little disruption and accidents. And by applying many times, then it's try to create this gathering and this tumor. So why this happens is because the organic dyes we use have the same molecule form that the human hormone. So the body gets confused, and it's what we call the endocrine disruptors. So it's why the body get this confusion. So for me to understand that, I started to extract 3 different concepts, and I thought it was an interesting idea to develop a textile ecoliteracy. So these 3 concepts as the ecoliteracy from David Orr, a pedagogue that coined the term in 1990. At first, this idea of ecoliteracy is why it was really to teach people, to teach kids, to teach industrial, to teach politics about this invisible interaction between toxicity and the natural world, understanding that we are part of this ecosystem, that we are not above it. Then the biomimicry concept of Janine Benyus from 1997 was the idea of taking nature as a model, how nature built its own materials at room temperature and without much energy and without any toxic compounds, even though nature can have this toxicity, but you know, taking it as a model, as an inspiration. And crossing that over with the circular textile design, going through biodesign and seeing some designers and researchers like Susan Lee or Carol Collette or Rebecca Earley through how do they absorb, you know, approach this idea through research action. So here my textile ecoliteracy is really crossing over these 3 different concepts: ecoliteracy, biomimicry, and circular design. And here we see how they interfere, how they cross over. Basically, what is a textile ecoliteracy is a mixed knowledge of textile, so knowing the fibers, knowing the origin, the sourcing of the fibers, knowing the compounds of the dyes, but also knowing the effect this interaction has on nature. So ecoliteracy, ecology is a very important part of this process. So when I enter into my material exploration and to prototype, I started by this circular idea and by this concept of cradle to cradle, popularized by Cradle to Cradle, but who was coming from ecological, industrial ecology from 1999, where we can use the waste of one industry to be the resource of another one. So I started like a very simple way of doing by collecting waste from food waste. So here we can see, for example, with onion, dyeing different fibers. So according if the fibers is proteinic, means coming back from animal, or cellulosic, coming back from vegetal, we can get different shades and different hue of colors. So with that, I started with different food waste, like onion dyes, like cabbage. Also, I wanted to see which kind of local waste we have around us, like, for example, cranberries, or which kind of agriculture waste we can use. The agriculture of wine, for example, with grapes, you know how the waste of one industry can become the source for these natural dyes. So for that, I was able to get a wide range of different shades and colors. And then I was also lucky enough to work in the speculative life biolab at Concordia University, where we have the chance to work with living organisms. Like here, I started to work with pigment-producing dyes. So here is the Serratia marcescens, and I started to cross these two approaches, how dyes could now be used to feed these bacteria to try to extend the palettes, because when we talk about bacteria, and especially pigment-producing bacteria, we have different strains, like the Indigofera, for example, produce a blue, while the Serratia marcescens produce a red. So how, by feeding differently with sweet, sour, or different food waste, I could extend this palette. So here I present the speculative lab on the 10th floor at the EV building at Concordia. What is interesting with working with bacteria also is that it's a renewable resources. Like I'm working with the same strain for 5 years now, and I just need to remove the oxygen, you know, prive the bacteria of oxygen and keeping it in the fridge or freeze it to be able to keep it for years and years. While I need it, I just reactivate the bacteria by giving oxygen and nutrients to it. So here we see an example where I try different fibers, different nutrients, and different way of trying to dye the fabric. So here we are at day 1, and here after 48 hours at room temperature, in the dark, the dyes, you know, is the bacteria is dyeing the fabric. So here at this stage, the bacteria is still alive. So the next step is to autoclave it. So we have to kill the bacteria to be able to wear it on the skin. So when we do that, the color is changing. Here we have some bright orange up to dark red. And at the end, at this stage, once the textile have been autoclaved, we see the different shades. So we go from dark red on the wool at the top left to bright pink on the silk in the middle of the samples. On cellulosic fibers, I get more, you know, like mauve, you know, light mauve. So I was trying to push this idea to extend the palette at this stage. So what else I also noticed working with living organisms is how they react, you know, with the environments they are growing within. So here, for example, I noticed that they like to be constrained. So it gave me the idea to guide the growth of the bacteria to be able to do prints, because as I was explaining at the beginning, I'm a print textile designer. So how I could guide these bacteria to design prints. So we can see at the top left of the picture the first hours of the bacteria growth, and then after a few hours you see the second pictures, and after 40 hours you see the top potential. And just to give a try, I left it up to 6 days, but even though it looked darker on the image here, at the end it doesn't make much difference. So really 48 hours is what it takes to dye the bacteria. A small sample of bacteria in a petri dish about 10 centimeters wide. So then, about this idea, you know, I was preparing the exhibition and I wanted to make, from these petri dishes, I wanted to dye a full garment. So this idea of scale up, how the bacteria can react, can, you know, size up and scale up. So here from these 10 centimeters dishes, I did a kind of paper size, you know, letter size sample. Here I gave the nutriment of a red bean. You know, when you soak the red bean in water, like I use the red bean to cook, but I keep the water with nutrients to give food to the bacteria. Here also I want to precise this kind of pattern I chose is, you know, when you streak the bacteria on the nutriment we use in microbiology, this movement of zigzag. So this was my inspiration to design this print. So here we are. This is the scale up. So from 10 centimeters petri dish, as we can see here, I scale up all the recipes to 2 meters by 90 centimeters, and the result was amazing. Like the bacteria doesn't, works as effectively on small scale as big scale. So here I can share a little video if it's working. So because I couldn't really extend the palette only by working with the bacteria and giving a different nutrient to the bacteria, I decided to mix for my exhibition these two techniques. So first you see, this is the back of the jacket I made in collaboration with Atelier B. I'm going to explain later. So first I dyed the fabric with avocado dye, then I overprinted with the bacteria. And I tried different techniques. I tried to apply the bacteria onto the fabric, which gives me a kind of blurry effect. But to get a sharper effect for my print, I found the best process was really to work as a kind of imprint. So I was really working on the agar. I didn't mention that the nutriments I prepare for the bacteria is made from agar. Agar is from algae. And then I mix it with the nutrients to give some food to the bacteria. So here I was just mentioning Atelier B, and also we see Montloup Textile. So for me, not only the multidisciplinarity of the thinking of the process is very important, mixing art and science, but also the collaboration with different stakeholders of the same industry, like Atelier B, for example, he's a duo of designers, promoting the sustainable aspect of fashion. So here we were collaborating on this project, and then Montloup with Lila Rousselet on the right, who is knitting jersey in Montreal. So here we were testing different fibers. We decided to go with an organic cotton to dye the process for the exhibition. So here we discuss the shape. We decided to develop, because it was happening in a lab, so a mix of scientific lab and artistic lab. The main purpose of the shape was from the sorrow of the scientific lab. So here again we see like the striking of the pattern and the connection with the print, the idea of the print I wanted to design. Also because the pattern, even though I'm guiding a bit the growth of the pattern, but there is also the freedom of the bacteria going, in an expected area. So it's why I didn't want to have a pattern that was covering everywhere, but also give freedom to the bacteria to express herself. And we see at the bottom of the jacket that sometimes, it created bubbles or different unexpected pattern. And this is part of the pattern of, if I could say, co-creation. And I put it in bracket, co-creation, because we call it co-creation because we work with bacteria, but also, we are in a way guiding the growth of the bacteria. So in a way, we are still in control, but I try to keep, the balance between the control I could give and I could keep for myself, but also the freedom of the bacteria. So it's a kind of balance. Through the exhibition, I was really interested in the storytelling behind the process of conception. The exhibition took place at the École Supérieure de Mode, de l'UQAM, and it was in the window display. So we couldn't, it was also during the pandemic. We couldn't really touch, we couldn't really enter in communication with the visitors. So it's why 3 weeks before the exhibition, I started to share the process on social media, like Instagram, Facebook, explaining, the why of this idea, the process, as I'm explaining today, I have the chance to talk to you in person, but how the future visitor could understand the process behind the result of the exhibition. So the storytelling behind the exhibition is an important part of the inspiration the exhibition can convey to other designers, but also to the public through society at large. So here is a picture of the exhibition where I explain, I show the final project, but also the different colors I could get. And at the end, I was really amazed to be able to match, closely match most of the Pantone color, which is the Bible in the fashion industry. So by playing with different ratio of waste or bacteria. And what is very important when you do this kind of research is keep track of what you do. It's really an equilibre, a balance between I call it intuition and rigor. You have to let it go, try things, we call it essai-erreur, but also writing everything you do to be able to reproduce this color, because with synthetic colors, we can just weight the amount of different powders. So we want to try to not imitate synthetic colors, but try to have recipes to be able to use them and reproduce them as closely as possible. So then after this, like if you remember my methodology at the beginning, we are in the process of disseminating the work. So there is the colloque or the conference like today, but the exhibition, the workshop is a good way of sharing, because we are sharing in action. We are sharing by producing these recipes, and by producing together these recipes, new ideas come up, because we are discussing, exchanging, everyone is bringing their own, experience behind this materiality. So these recipes evolves, like conjointly. So here we're just talking about the importance of keeping track of what you do. Sometimes the mistake is gonna give you an expected result, but you have to keep track and understand which kind of mistake. We call it serendipity. Serendipity is the concept of finding something like you were looking for something else. So this idea, this crack, this weakness we find by trying and testing different things is gonna open paths to new way of developing these dyes. So here I'm coming to this mapping aspect I was mentioning earlier. Who locally in Montreal could be these actors who could come into interaction to promote this way of developing local colors? So of course we need people from in the design and textile industry, but we also need people from agricultural waste. Which people are gonna are recollecting the waste, i.e. be able to give it as a resource to scale up this industry and trying to become a circular design, circular economy. So here, for the one here today, I brought the sample we see here on the image to show how we can really extend this color palette, not only by using different waste and different bacteria, but also by playing with ratio, like being, vary like half of the water, double over dyeing, also reusing the bath. Look how you can try to be in the cycle loop where we're not gonna waste the dye after the bath, but maybe keeping it, reusing it, stocking it, and then adding more. So this idea of cycling in the bath is very important to keep. So here is some tests I was doing with this company called Syntech in around Montreal, where we decided to use the cranberry because we were thinking, okay, what do we have locally? Because I was using onion, avocado, but they are, like especially avocado, they are not that sustainable because they take a lot of water to grow. But the idea also, when you talk about sustainability, it's not 100% never sustainable. We have to make choices. So this waste already exists. So how we can take, the nutrient from this already existing material without creating a new one before it goes to the compost. So here the idea was, okay, we make cranberry juice, for example. how in Quebec there are many cranberry, how we can repurpose the waste to dye this, to use it as a dye. So we were trying different tests. We were trying also to transform these liquid dyes into powder dyes to like in synthetic dyes I was mentioning earlier, to play with different recipe, to be able to stock, because to stock liquid dyes take more space than dry ones. So how we could remove the humidity and use it as a powder. So this is in the process of developing a direction with an industry which at first is not from the fashion industry, is from the agroalimentaire industry, and how we make bridges between these industries locally in Quebec. And here is just to give you an idea of the number of tests, because of course there is the dyeing a textile is easy, we just have to dip in a little color, but the challenge is to keep color fast, light fasting, resisting to wash. So there is all this invisible preparation, which we call the mordanting. So here on this image we can see all this little letter, STM, SAA is different mordant I try to keep to improve the light fastness of the colors. And so I would like to thank you for this your attention, and I'm really open to your question about my research. Thank you very much.
Just like a quick question. Can we go up and see the three?
Of course you can come and touch. And I don't know if there are questions on, yeah? Maybe we need a microphone for people to hear on Zoom?
Yep, we'll get you a mic just right away. And I see PK has a question as well online. PK?
Okay.
Shall I go ahead?
We talk
Yeah?
very often.
Sure, go ahead, PK. Sorry, I'm just hearing somebody speak in the space. Sorry about that, folks. The person in the space, go ahead,
Sorry,
please.
there's so many voices going around. We often speak of textile fabric when it comes to sustainable dyeing, but is there a way to transfer this knowledge or this practice of sustainable pigmentation to other materials? Because I know for maybe, and then there's also the idea like in what context do we use that coloration? Is it to produce more garment, or is it to produce more garment from reused material fibers? So I guess this is a very broad question,
Yeah.
but like, yeah, I don't know if you just have like a speck of idea.
Yeah, I can see several questions in your question, but the first answer I could say is that it doesn't only apply to textile. Like I didn't mention, I didn't know how much project I could present today, but in another project we dye bioplastic. So using this kind of food waste too, we made a huge membrane that was exhibited last year in Pompidou called Fossilation. So we can use these dyes to use bioplastic too. The other question is like, are we producing new fabric? For example, some fashion designers like Ellen Fisher, repurpose take back, their old clothing and then over dye and to make them, again, be able to wear them a second time. So this is an aspect we can consider, like these dyes can be used to over dye garments. Also, something I didn't mention is that, of course, natural dyes and synthetic dyes doesn't have the same finality. Of course, synthetic dyes last forever, but makes it makes us question the fact that we want new season all the time. We want a new taste, you know, we're changing like fall to spring, we want a new color. So there is a project called Design to Fade that was made in collaboration with the brand Puma and the research group Living Color, where they admit the fact that yes, colors fade away and this is okay. And we can maybe after season over dyed and change this color for another one. So it means we can use the same fabric, but just changing the color because the color fade away because we want new colors. So this is a kind of mindset, changing mindset, you know. So we're starting with one path and then it opens ways to many different paths and approaches we can consider.
Yeah, I was just, I guess my question was, it's no longer a question, I guess I'm just answering because, yeah, when like the door of like eco-conscious pigment, coloration, dyeing is like democratized, then there is like this other question of like, I am a fashion designer, for example, and then there's this, it becomes like an ethic question of like, do I want to make more? And I don't know, I guess the other day I was just trying some of my own clothes and I was wondering if I was, if I was wishing to pursue a career in fashion, for example, there is this, I guess it's almost a crippling question, like, do I keep making more or like, and then, yeah, like you said, there is like all those many paths that open of like color that is fading and that's okay. So many things that become okay once this path is taken.
Yeah,
So,
I hear you because I have this question from my students at UCAM. They are future fashion designers. They study fashion design at the École Supérieure de Mode, and sometimes they address this eco-anxiety, we call it, like, oh my God, I'm a designer, I'm gonna produce more, so I'm gonna be part of this loop of over-conception, over-production. So for me, you know, it's a kind of white pages and it's a kind of new opportunities for young designers, future designers to be aware of what was wrong until now and reflect on this new way of approaching color, approaching materiality. So I didn't mention it either, but you have this searcher who published the book Fiber Shed, you know, in California. So it's about questioning, you know, the way the fiber comes from, and then connecting the agriculture with the makers, and how in this closed loop within, you know, like 250 kilometers, how we can create our own clothes. And Fiber Shed Quebec is actually under construction here with Marie-Ève Faust from the École Supérieure de Mode, you know, and we are gathering as actors of this industry in Quebec to reflect on how we can produce in a sustainable way clothing locally. And so this is why I think, of course, even though there is an eco-anxiety, and another way, it is a kind of exciting time to try new things, and to this ecoliteracy, textile ecoliteracy, can help to connect the ecology and with design, you know. Okay.
Thanks, Vanessa. Piqué, would you like to go ahead online?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Vanessa. I wish I could be with you, but I'm really excited to listen in this morning. What I find really fascinating about your work, and so over the years, it's really come together in such a beautifully integrative way. And I need to use the word beautifully because as much as you have worked with scientists and the community such as Atelier Bay, and really looking at exciting potential and so on, I would like you, and also close to my heart is the idea of freedom of the bacteria and all the actors that you include, sort of the species inclusiveness. My question is for you, what is the importance of aesthetics, always carrying through with the aesthetics, even when you're dealing with petri dishes and tiny scraps of, not scraps, but squares of paper, you have this remarkable designer artist eye to keep us in the loop of how important aesthetics are. Can you talk about why that is important to you?
Okay, sure. Thank you very much for your questions. Very nice to see you, even though through a screen. It's been a while. Yeah. So aesthetic is a kind of intuitive. You know, like I was talking before, between intuition and rigor. Like this is, it's a kind of natural. I know it's hard to understand sometimes, and you know, we talk as artists, as oh my God, they know. You know, they cannot explain what they do. It's why we have all this dialogue about research creation. Like we try to do research, reflect, but it's a kind of intuitively aesthetic. How can I explain that? I see like Samuel Bianchini, for example, who I talking 2 days ago. He told me, oh, Vanessa, you're good at you know, taking pictures of all the process, but it's a kind of, it's an intuition too. I record the process, and then when I present the work today to you, when I say D1, what happened, D2, what happened, I didn't plan to present that today, but for me it's important to mark the moment. You know, like there are stages, even if at first I don't want to make it beautiful, it's a kind of happening anyway, you know, without me controlling it. It's a kind of, it's an automatism. Like we work with color, we work with graphics, we work, I'm under action. Like for example, I'm cutting. We were doing some workshop 3 days ago, you know, like it was lively. We take the workshop, we were working with kombucha, foldings, papers, and then I took 3 pieces of kombucha, then I take a picture, and there is a kind of aesthetic without planning. It's a kind of...
Okay, but do you think, Vanessa, that it's also your training to be as a designer, but also that each of your processes is precious in and of itself, that it must be presented as precious as well?
I didn't even talk about my training. Actually, I trained in fashion design. Then I started in sewing actually when I was 15, then in fashion design, then in textile design. So I think this aesthetic is part of me, because even in my family, within my family, you know, I cook, I love cooking. So it's why I make this connection between the cooking of the dyes and the cooking of the everyday life. And we organize a cooking session with friends, for example, where I come from. And each time I record the process. I film, I take pictures, and it's a kind of me breathing in and out, really. Like taking picture, recording, telling stories through what I do, even with my family, you know, when we do a walk, we take bicycle, there is always the story. I leave trace through visual. So it can be photographic, it can be back here, but it's often photographic actually.
That's a beautiful articulation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
We have one more question in the space.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Thank you very much for your work as well as this lecture. It was really interesting. I was wondering in terms of, because you talked a lot about like the practice of dyeing the colors and a lot of research, but I was wondering if you were still in the research stage or if you are now in like the production stage, because like I can see that there's like a lot of like colors and like fibers and textile and design, but I was wondering if like this process now it can be sort of like expanded to like a production level where like designers can use those tools and like this like big table of like different colors to make it like in a in a big production way, and if you have also like the tools to make it, or if it's still like in research or like production research or something, like in Montreal?
Okay, very interesting question. We are within a research creation. So when we arrive in this context of research creation, we really want to come up with solution. And I put solution in brackets because then when you read about research creation, it's not about finding solution. It's about, opening windows, opening new paths of inquiries. Like you start with a question, and 5 years later at the end of your PhD, you have far more questions than when you started. So, but in the way, you gather people in this same questioning. So everyone, like here today, is a kind of, planting little seeds in every brain, and what can I do with this idea? So this is the idea of dissemination. Disseminating this work through galleries, through workshops, through color gets, and I wrote it in the slide, is a wider aperture than publishing in a scientific review, even though it's very important, but the public is more targeted. So here within this research creation, my stage at the time is to write the thesis. So I have first to finish to write the thesis and to be able to put this concept into production, and the industry is very interested, and as you could see, the beginning of the intersectorial collaboration we did with different companies is to push this idea further, but it takes engineers, it takes, like working with the CTT, for example, in Saint-Hyacinthe, I'm in collaboration with them, the Centre des Textiles Technologiques. So you have a different researcher who are reflecting on this idea of color. So it's by coming together and by talking broadly about these possibilities locally in Montreal, that it could come into production. But today it's really in the context of resource creation and the process of sustainability within the textile field.
So it's less about manufacturing, it's more about like researching like ideas, and then like take those ideas and just like spread them around, and they just...
Yeah, exactly. But because I'm from the industry, I spent 20 years in industry, my heart wants to help the industry, come back with solution. But then within the academia, it's a kind of, it's not schizophrenic, but it's a bit like, okay, where am I at the moment? So within, and I'm talking about that to my director, and they say, okay, the priority is to finish the PhD. So within this frame, and started to, yes, it could be the beginning of a business, a collaboration to develop that further. But it cannot be done within the academia context. It's a kind of separate. So this is planting seeds, but I would like to come up with a solution for the local fashion ecosystem, that I call it. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have so many questions.
Okay.
But it's because it's really interesting.
No, it's very interesting too, because your question makes my speech more lively also than presenting,
I was also wondering, in terms of the difference between synthetic dye and natural dye, about the process. Not just like the natural dye, like the ingredients to make the dye, but have you seen like a reduction in terms of like the water waste when in production, the tools? Because I was like, that's actually what I want to do, and I just found that like for me, like as a student level, like it's really hard for me not to make like the end, like the textile and the dye is like sustainable and like biodegradable and it fades, but like the production of it, like the waste for me is like so considerable. And I was wondering if like on that level, like you can see like a reduction of like the waste in the water versus
Okay, so when I was explaining earlier that sustainability, it will never be 100% sustainable, because you have to make choices. When you start to make something, there is an impact. So smaller you make it, like you make a 10 centimeter swatch, smaller is the impact. When you start to produce for fast fashion, the impact is huge. We see it, for example, in organic cotton. You know, like organic cotton is only 1% of the production, but because now it's a kind of a marketing way of selling, you know. So I was mentioning earlier Montloup, you know, who is using organic cotton. But this year, for example, she didn't have any organic cotton anymore because all the industry bought this 1% of organic cotton. But if we start to make everything organic, of course we don't use pesticide, but it takes huge amount of water to make cotton. So it's the balance I was explaining between the choice you have to make. Concerning color, for example, with synthetic colors, some industry now are developing colors, dry colors, without water, but they dye only synthetic fibers. So in my case, I was mentioning the way how I was reusing the bath, you know, like, because when you make, it needs water to dye. So at first I was making the dye, and then I was throwing up the bath, but then I say, no, I would like to keep the bath and do a closed loop, you know. So then you have, during the way you're doing it, during your action, it's like a reflection in action. So you do something and you say, oh no, I have to keep that. So then you try on the way to make a drawing of, like, I was unable to answer Piquet's question about aesthetic earlier, but now I try to analyze through, you know, at the same time as you asked me the question, to analyze how I see something, I observe the amount of water and how I could come up with another idea. So taking note, here I'm taking note of what I see. So this idea of taking note of what I see, this reflection in action, is a way, is a path to change processes in a larger way, a larger picture. You know, I see myself walking, I see what's wrong, and then I take note of what could change. For example, next time I reuse the dye bath. You know, so I keep the dye now, and I feed it more. So I need less waste to get my color, and I don't throw it away. I don't throw the water away. I keep the water.
So the natural dye, you dry it to make it a powder, and then you mix it with water?
No, now I keep. There are two ways. Okay. The dry side of it is to work with the test we made with the company, but in another way, this is very energivore. It takes a lot of electricity, you know. So you have to make choice, and then you draw the choice you made. So this is the path I took. It's not, it won't be perfect, but at least you address sustainability at this stage. You didn't use much water, you know, like, but you carry on dyeing with natural dyes. So if you decide, okay, I dye without water, okay, without water is a powder, but anyway, to dye, natural dyes, we need to come back to water. So this idea of recycling water, and I'm thinking here of the lensing fiber, you know, the tencel, the modal, the tencel is the first man-made fiber that received an eco label because it's a closed loop of water. You know, we are not, we are reusing the solvent and the water, and the solvent is not toxic. So thinking of closed loop, closing the loop, you know, like is the principle of circular design or circular economy. This loop, or the material I have, and you see it in cradle to cradle. You know, you have these two loops. One is the natural nutrients that come back to compost, and the technical nutrients that you can separate and bring back into production again. So how, in the way you develop your dyes, you never generate waste, or you minimize your waste. So water is a huge important one. So how I keep more water, because we can't keep reusing the water. So it means we have to build an industry, a company where you have this bath running, and then you have this bath of color, but each color, and I didn't mention, there is the first, we prepare the fiber to keep the color, then we dye the color, and then we can modulate the color. So you can have these 5 different big baths, for example, and you never waste the water. It's always in activation, and then you put less waste because there is some color, the remnant of older color. And then there is the modulation part where according if you make your bath acid or basic, you can change the color and get different shades. Yeah, but you have to make choices.
Thank you,
Okay,
Vanessa.
one more,
Are
like
there-
the last one, I promise. I was also wondering, like for non-synthetic dye, you know, when you finish it, like, and you take it to dry, it's usually like c'est vraiment très plat, alors que like the natural dye, when you dye it and then you let it dry, there's a little bit of waves, like that is sort of like it looks very organic. But I was wondering if you pass like something pour le rendre plat, comme like a heater, does it change the color? Does it change like the dye itself, or have you seen like some changes?
I don't have this problem of like the colors are dye.
And then they're fixed. Like if
Yeah.
I take like something like an iron,
No,
comme le repasser.
no, because I prepared the fiber earlier.
Oh,
by
okay, yeah.
mounting.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
yeah, but we can carry on the discussion. Yeah, thank you.
All right, a round of applause for Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And a quick word for folks on Zoom. We will be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but please join us this afternoon again. We have 3 more conversations and presentations and room for engagement. But right now, between 11:30 and 1:30, we're doing an in-person workshop on eco-poetry here in the space with Christian Favreau and Mariam Saleh. So we invite you to stick around, if those of you, or come back for 11:30 to participate in that workshop. All right, have a great morning and see you in this afternoon. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.